Spacers, do you use them or not? A great idea in theory. Let me show you how they actually work in practice. The idea is to form a solid connection from your hanger to your nut. So it goes washer, bearing, spacer, which connects these two inner rings of your bearing. Bearing, washer, and nut. Forgive me if you saw this one on the short, but now we can see the bearings still spin freely. So as a unit, mechanically, this works really well. I'll show you where we get into problems. Let me set up the wheel. So before we put this together, I want you guys to take note of the core of the wheel. This should have an exact thickness, and it should be the exact same thickness as the spacer. It's not always, depending on the brand, so that's where we run into problems, but let's get this one set up. So again, we got our washer, bearing, and bearing, spacer, and even though the graphic's worn off, I gotta have it. Graphic in. Okay, so let's get this one cranked down tight and see if the wheel still spins. Not really. So that's kind of annoying, right? It should be spinning better. And that tells me that the core is probably not the exact same thickness of the bearing. These bearings are getting torqued on because it's not identical. And it has to be so close that maybe it's not reasonable to expect every wheel manufacturer to make the exact same consistently sized core. So now let's check these other two top wheels. These ones have spacers in them as well. I'm gonna crank this one down tight. That one is spinning. It doesn't sound quite right, but it is still spinning. That one's actually spinning a little closer. These bearings are a bit dry, so it would sound a bit better if they were like cleaned and properly lubricated. Let's do this bottom one. Get that cranked down tight like it was. So that's the one that isn't spinning. And now this one has, this is kind of like our control wheel. It has no spacer in it. So I could just keep cranking it down. And what starts to happen is basically you will start putting so much tension on the inner ring of the bearing that you're kind of starting to break your bearings. Like eventually your bearings will collapse in on themselves if you keep turning it. So I'm going to have it just enough that it's solid, because this is the next thing I want to show you about spacers, is it changes the way your board sounds, and in a way that I personally don't like, because it doesn't sound like a skateboard to me anymore. So let's put this thing on the ground. All right, listen to this. Does that sound like a skateboard? It sounds like a log now. So that's one of the things that I've never liked, is the way it changes it. Here's one without spacers, with the wheels having a tiny bit of slack. And now it actually has that like skate sound. That's a skateboard. But now I'm gonna ride this around and see how it feels. So in all honesty, it actually feels kind of slow to me. That one feels and sounds better. Okay, here's another thing that spacers do. First, let's listen to this board. I'm gonna do some power slides. It says no spacers and a little slack in the wheels. Okay, there's going to be a bit of discrepancy because it's a different formula wheel, different brand, but now listen to the spacer wheel. It takes away that reverb because your wheel isn't moving a little bit side to side. It's that tiny bit of chatter that creates the nice bark when you power slide. So that's another thing you're going to lose when you use spacers. So one of the arguments for spacers is people say that if you land on your axle really hard, that it's going to stop axle shift. So axle shift is when this piece of metal in here literally moves from side to side. And what it does when it hits really hard is it'll make it loose on one side and bind on the side that got hit. So let's look at this one right now. This one's not really spinning freely. This one is. Let's try hitting this side and see if we can get this to spin freely. And this isn't a dig on slappy trucks. All trucks still have a minute amount of axle shift. It's very minimal, but it's enough to cause a problem. Let's see if it actually works. It might not. Yeah, maybe it's actually working in this case. Let's try it on the side with 2 spacers. Okay, they're not spinning good because of the bearings, but okay, that is actually working. And maybe the slappy trucks do actually have some really good resistance to axle slip. So all that being said, I still have had axle shift occur even using spacers. So, you know, depends. Let me know in the comments if you've used spacers and still had axle shift or if it sorts it out for you. So for about 10 years, I actually did use spacers, but I never actually snugged them down tight. So I used to use them with just a little bit of slack, you know, a hair, so they could spin freely, but I still had the spacer in there. Now, most people will say that there's actually zero benefit to that because unless you have it cranked down tight, you're not actually engaging the spacer, therefore not getting the benefits. And I actually agree. And the other thing that I noticed happened was when I started riding Spitfires, because I used to ride Bones, and these are Swiss Bones bearings, that's where the spacers are from. I don't necessarily think Spitfires have the exact same core size as a Bones spacer, so I found it problematic to use. The 2 things that would happen to me was, one, if it was really cold out, let's say it was winter, and I would take my board into a heated indoor space to skate, there was expansion somewhere, and all of a sudden my wheels would seize up. And if I didn't have a skate key to give it like that little, you know, less than a quarter turn loose, then my wheels would be on there too snug and they weren't rolling properly. So that was something. And those are all the reasons I stopped using spacers. So I haven't noticed any decrease in performance from not using them. It's less of a headache to set up. Yeah, it's just generally better. So I'm not a spacer guy. If you are a spacer guy, let me know in the comments. And I know some of you are wondering, come on Ben, how are these slappy trucks? Well, let's do a few slappies to close out the video, huh? Whoa. That should be grinding better, honestly. You know those hot summer days when the wax gets like baked off the curves? Missing my crook every time. I have missed literally every slappy crook I've tried on these. What's up? Let's try a couple feebles. That's better. Man, something is not working how I'm used to it. I'm gonna try some aces with some giant wheels I got. That's what I get for leaving these beans laying around the park. I was having the worst time trying to grind this, and I want to see if it was just dry concrete or if it was actually the metal of the truck. So a few grinds on here with the aces now. Better. This thing needs some red brick action. Okay, that's it. That was, up until the last few minutes, why I don't use spacers. Hope you guys are doing really well. Maybe you could see why I haven't been riding those other trucks either. Might just be the wheels though. These big old wheels are feeling good. Anyways, I'm done. Yeah, that was a super kind of ADHD tangent at the end of the video. But I know some of you needed your skate fill. Anyways, I'm done. Without dragging it out any longer, I'm going. Bye.